Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's History's Lunch program, which is sponsored by the John and Lucy Shackelford Charitable Fund of the Community Foundation for Mississippi. We're in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium, in the Museum of Mississippi History and Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, and we're streaming live on both Facebook and YouTube. If you have not already done so, please silence your cell phones. Remember that there are now regular tours of the Medgar and Murley Evers Home National Monument. A shuttle departs from these museums on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. The hour-long tours are free, and for now they're capped at groups of 10. You can sign up for the tours at our front desk. And then on Saturday, October 15th, we'll partner with the Mississippi Archaeological Association on the Archaeology Expo. Bring your family to the Old Capitol Green between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. to have your artifacts identified, see interactive exhibits, tech demonstrations, and more. And I hope that you'll join us next week for History's Lunch when Roderick Red will screen clips from Promised Land, a new documentary produced by the Mississippi Heritage Trust about Mound Bayou. Today, we are delighted to welcome Margaret A. Burnham to discuss her new book, By Hands Now Known, Jim Crow's Legal Executioners. Margaret Burnham earned her BA in History from Tougaloo College and her LLB from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She is the founding director of the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project at Northeastern University and has been a staffer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, a civil rights lawyer, a defense attorney, and a judge. A professor of law, Burnham was nominated by President Joe Biden and confirmed by the U.S. Senate to serve on the Civil Rights Cold Case Records Review Board. Help me welcome Margaret Burnham.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that very warm introduction. As Chris said, I was a civil rights worker for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. What he didn't say is that I spent a good deal of my time right here on Lynch Street in Jackson, Mississippi. So it's a welcome back home for me in many ways. So messed that one up right away. It's great to see all of you here, and it's great to be here for this lunch series. This is my second time back at the museum as a guest speaker. Last time I was here, it was with Jerry Mitchell. I'm really delighted to be back in this wonderful space and be part of the programming here. This project, which is reflected both in a book and in an archive, began in 2007. And at that point, I brought a number of folks in our civil rights community. Sorry,
That's all right, you're good.
am I screwing up here?
No, that was. No, put the wrong thing again.
Technical difficulties. Just a minute, guys. There you go. Thank you so much. So this project began, as I said, in 2007. We had a conference at Northeastern. That year, the federal government had, the President Bush at the time, had signed into law the Emmett Till Cold Case Act. And the point of the Emmett Till Cold Case Act was to empower local authorities to revisit the cases of the civil rights era that had not been fully adjudicated, not properly adjudicated, and where there was no justice for the families who had lost their loved ones. And so you all will recall, obviously here, Cheney, Schwerner, Goodman, Medgar's case, and then in Birmingham, Alabama, the four girls. A number of these cases were reopened by the federal government by state and federal authorities as a result of the work of Jerry Mitchell and a number of other crusading journalists who went back and dug up the evidence. Sometimes they dug it up from just right next door here at the Mississippi Archives, is where they found the evidence in in the Medgar Evers case. So we said, okay, we can participate. I can help out this project because my civil rights days have never left me. They have really informed every professional choice I've ever made in life. Starts at 1964 in Lynch Street. And so I thought, this is a great project for students because they can work with the family members when their cases are being investigated by the federal government. It turns out the federal government didn't pursue those cases. They didn't. They half-masted the flag, but they didn't raise it very high. But at the time, we didn't know that, and so we pulled together a conference that where Jerry participated, Merle Evers came, Rita Schwerner-Bender came, your congressperson Benny Thompson was there. All keynoting this conference that pulled together people from really across the country to say, what can we as activists do with this law to bring greater justice to our communities? So at the end of that period, when it seemed to me that we weren't going to be able effectively to work with the federal government on those cases for a variety of reasons we're going to talk about later, we did begin looking at an earlier period, the 1930s and the 1940s. And we found there that there was, in effect, a vacuum there, that there were hundreds of cases, similar cases. In other words, people killed for nothing or people killed for protest. African Americans here, we're talking about exclusively African Americans, although this is not exclusively an African American problem. And so we decided we would focus on that earlier period and begin to just begin counting the cases. And we got our students engaged. They would come down to places like Mississippi and investigate their cases. We developed partnerships with local universities. The Mississippi University for Women up in Columbus partnered with us, institutions and educational institutions in Birmingham, and we have a long-standing partnership with Southern University Law Center. So students from really not just our group of students, but from all over the country. And what the students would do would be they'd collect the local material, the national material from the DOJ, whether it was from the Justice Department or the FBI, as well as the advocacy group material, which is mostly archived at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., the NAACP records. But we also needed local access to materials and to communities. And so I am grateful to the partnership that we've had for many years with archivists and researchers and community activists here in Mississippi for our Mississippi project. And I want to acknowledge the absolutely fabulous work done by Jan Hillegas, who is the one with the mask on over there, the white-haired lady with the mask, who has partnered with us from the very beginning of this project. So we knew we'd need the materials from the archive. We weren't down here. She'd go over there and get them. We needed death certificates. She'd go over there and get them. Didn't matter what we needed. Jan was here for us. So please, Jan, I thank you so much. And I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that I'm here with my the co-director of the project, Rose Zoltek-Jick, both of us here from Boston. And Rose as well has been, Professor Zoltek-Jick has been involved in the classroom and in the field on this work for many years. So I started with the Dee and Moore case, and you all know about Dee and Moore out of Franklin County. These are yes, no. I'm seeing some no's in here. All right, so these two young men were 19 years old, And I don't want to tell my age, but I was also 19. And this is 1964. And I was working in Jackson, and one was a college student, and the other one had already graduated from high school and was working in a pulp company, timber company. And on this particular Saturday in May 1964, they were hanging out and they got picked up. They began to hitch a ride back to town. They lived out in the country in Franklin County, and they were picked up by some Klansmen. And they were beaten in the Homachita Forest, and after that, they were taken out to an offshoot of the Mississippi River, and a weight was tied to one of them, and while the other one watched, he was thrown in the river where he drowned, and then a weight was tied to the second boy, and he too was thrown in the river. And at this conference in 2007, one of the participants was a man by the name of Thomas More. Thomas More is the amazing brother, born July 4th, of Charles Moore. And Thomas told me they're trying the criminal case in Jackson, at the courthouse here in Jackson, the federal courthouse here in Jackson. You ought to come down and take a look. And I did. And the one reason I did is because I was here and in 1964 in a neighboring county. And until the 21st century, I had never heard of D and Moore, even though that's what we were doing, protecting people from racial violence. That was part of what we were doing. That case disappeared. And it wasn't until the 1990s that Thomas More was able to attract the attention of journalists, and ultimately the Mississippi papers began to pick it up, and that case was tried, successfully tried, and one of the Klansmen was convicted and died in jail in a federal trial before an African-American judge whose name I've forgotten. And as I listened to the testimony, I said, there's a civil case here because Franklin County should never have let this happen. Franklin County knew about this while it was going on and did nothing to protect those two young men. Rather, they were complicit. And so we filed a civil action which was successfully concluded, and with the proceeds of that, I started the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project and began looking at these 1940s, 1950s era cases. Now you might ask, well, and two products have come from that work. One is our archive, which I will introduce you to in just a moment, and the other is this book by hands now known. And they were both released in the last week of September, so it's a culmination of sorts. So let me tell you first about how we shaped the archive. We, as scholars, of course, you have to figure out, okay, what are you actually looking at here? What's the bracket? You can't look at the whole of racial violence across the United States of America. What's your time period and what's your geographical area? And so we decided to start in 1930, and we started in 1930 because there are two other scholars who studied lynching and created an archive from the late 19th century through 1930. Their names are Tolnay and Beck. And they produced a book called The Festival of Violence in 1995. And so we said, okay, well, let's consider that period done. They've counted, they've gathered, they've counted, they've made public. So let's start in 1930. And then we said, you could go until 1970, or you could even go to 1980, but we're going to stop in stop at the end of 1954. Because after 1954, there's a lot more public, first of all, that's the beginning, Brown Board, the beginning of the sort of official beginning of civil rights movement, 54 to 67. And we said, okay, we're going to stop here and assume that the cases that followed from 54 are going to be better known. So if there's a black box, it's these other years. And indeed, there was a black box. And so ultimately, this archive, which is available to all of you, crrjarchive.org, contains 1,000 cases from the former Confederate states from 1930 to 1954. They are cases which we say are racially motivated. I have a colleague who's corrected me and said, well, you don't really know what the motivation of the perpetrators is, and so, and he uses the term racially conditioned. But whether it's racially conditioned or racially motivated, these are cases in which we have determined that race played a critical, essential role in the death. And to be in our archive, it has to be lethal. So there are obviously all forms of other violence, affecting women in particular, sexual violence, all kinds of other things, castration. But none of it, if that's all it is, you're not in the archive. So let me just give you a sense of what this archive can do first, and then I want to talk a little bit about the book. So we're going to search across the archive. So, okay, wait. First, let me just show you. Whoops, I'm sorry, I got to use the mouse here. These are the people in the archive. And I lied, I said 1,000. We do have over 1,000, but in this particular version, 923 incidents. And those are the documents. And the documents include DOJ, FBI, NAACP, local documents generated by people like Jan in states across the country, and family records. You see, I am not a digital native here. I already told you my age, so you know that. Let me just get myself together here. So we're going to, oh gosh. What the? Hello? Where's Chris? Help is on the way. Could you just put in Banks, and can you help me here? So we're going to look for a person named Banks. Wait, I need you. Stay up here, buddy. Stay up here. Now now we're going to go to Claude Banks. He's up here. Next one, yeah. Claude Banks. Okay, so we don't have a photo of Claude Banks. Stay up here. Okay. But you see, Mississippi, African American, 23 years old when he died. Now go to incident. Now this will tell us the story right here. I'm sorry. You want to move? Should I move over? Okay. So here's one of the 1,000 cases. So all of you know Fred Banks. And this is his great uncle. And he was killed in 1938. And as you can see, he was a farmer killed by a posse in Madison County, Mississippi. The armed posse of police and citizens was hunting for a black man alleged to have committed a robbery against a white man. Banks was driving through town with a friend when his car was stopped by the posse. he was shot and killed. I think I got it now.
If you need anything, I'm here.
Don't go too far. So, all right, so we have that a summary, and then we have collected, thank you, Jan, and thank you, students, all of these records on the killing of Mr. Banks. Let's just take a look at one of them. I'm a Mac person, that's part of the problem. Let's go to that advocacy group. See where it says advocacy? Yeah.
Is that the one?
Yeah. Let's see what that shows us. Okay, so can we download this one?
Which one?
Yeah.
Do you click on something?
Okay, that's enough. You can download this. But so let me just tell you the story here. There are no federal records with respect to Claude Banks. As I said, he died he was killed in 1938. He's in a car with his girlfriend in Canton. And the police, the sheriff there, had deputized a group of men to go find a black man who had robbed a white man somewhere in town. And Claude and his girlfriend stop at a barrier that they have created, and somehow or another, he doesn't get out of the car. There's him, a girlfriend, and another friend, three of them. Doesn't get out of the car, but the posse shoots him to death. And the Banks family, this is to show you, first of all, how sort of incidental, humdrum, and routine the violence is. And also to say that it affected African Americans across our economic groups. So the Banks are a prominent family in this city. They had, as some of you may know, they have a funeral business to this very day. Fred, of course, is joined a member of the Supreme Court. All of them accomplished morticians and business people. And this young man's father was a mortician in the city back in 1938, ran a black funeral home. Knew the sheriff, knew the city leaders, all to no avail. No trial, no nothing. And so when I talked to Judge Banks about this, we didn't have all this material yet, but we had enough so that I knew this case belonged in this archive of ours. And I said, well, what do you know about this? And he said, well, we knew that he was killed, but we didn't know the details. And with my partner, I went to Canton to visit the Banks family. And Fred wasn't there on that occasion, but the brothers who still live in the town were there, his brothers, Fred's brothers. And I said, what do you all know about it? And they pulled out their Bible with all the yellowed newspaper articles, the few newspaper articles that appeared in the local press about the thing. And that's all they knew about it. So I say this all to say how important it is to the families to retrieve this history. And now, they can do it. Families can go to our archive, and everything that could fall in our net is now on the web. Everything we could capture from the local newspapers, the African American press, and the official records, and to the extent that there are official records in the local communities, we've been able to get those. They're all on the web. Now, I will also say this. Our archive is far richer. That is to say, there are more cases in Georgia and in Alabama than they are in Mississippi. And that's not because Mississippi didn't have a lot of cases. That's because Mississippi was a closed society. It did not have the resistance movements. They were not allowed to raise their their head in Mississippi in the 1930s and 1940s. It wasn't Birmingham. They didn't have a newspaper. Well, you had a newspaper, Jackson Advocate, but it wasn't an advocacy newspaper. And so, we've captured a lot from Mississippi, but we don't think we've captured all that is out there. And if we haven't captured it, it's lost to history. It is utterly lost to history. We'll never know X, as far as most of these places are concerned, but in particular, in Mississippi, we'll never know X. Let me give you one other case out of the archive that I think is particularly revealing. Where's my friend? Let's go back to
the front.
Yeah, to the search thing. Okay, now, Tom Jones. Now you have to go down. We'll see which one it is.
Tom Jones Jr.
I think it's this one right here, Tom. Try that one. Yeah, that's him. Okay, that's good.
That's good.
So here's another case, and this is, I'm going to give you this one because I think it exemplifies what our students have done with the help of Jan. I'm not sure whether Jan actually accompanied them on this case or not. Tom Jones, again, young man, dies at the age of 24, 1945. So, the war is over. And he spent the war years in New Orleans as a young longshoreman. And here he is, he's coming back home on a bus from New Orleans to his home, which is in a small town outside of Natchez. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go here. Wilkinson County. And he gets to Wilkinson, and he goes to get his luggage out of the back of the segregated bus. And the bus driver, who knows him because they grew up together, he's now a bus driver, the other guy's a longshoreman. Jones asks for his luggage, and bus driver says, "Say yes, sir." And Jones may have said sir, but he may have said it too low, or he may not have said yes, who knows. The bus driver calls a nearby police officer, and right there, with the luggage still in the back compartment of the bus, the police officer shoots and kills Jones. You're aha-ing, but hey, there's 1,000 of these. 1,000 of them. And his family hadn't made it to the bus stop yet. And when they get there to reclaim this 24-year-old man's body. And Jan helped us on this case, and our students went down there to Wilkinson County, and this is a family in different circumstances from the Banks family. They're still on the farm. Our students went out and picked pecans with the brother of Tom Jones. And that photograph that you all saw a moment ago, I don't know how to get back to it. There he is. The brother gave us that picture. And he knew almost nothing about how his brother passed, right? He remembered him, but he knew very little about how he passed. And that's been the work, and it has taken us a long time, but we are just so proud of this product. And so you might ask, well, how are people going to use this archive? Well, first of all, the families are not going to have to hire a lawyer to go up to Washington, D.C. to find the material that's in our national archives. They're just going to be able to find a young person who can who can click on a document and then download it. All right, for them. So that's perhaps the most important value, returning it to the families and the communities. But as well, And in every case, we have a death certificate. Every single one of these cases, because even if the newspapers say the person died, newspapers could get it wrong and do get it wrong. So we confirm in every case that there's a death, and the death certificates are full of information. And secondly, the archive will be of enormous value to scholars who are going to begin to reconfigure their understanding of the Jim Crow period, and also reconsider the role of police violence in our history. So, a lot has been written about lynching. Lynching stands out quite prominently in the American understanding of race. But lynching is really just the tip of the iceberg. And it's an iceberg with a very, very deep base. And, at the bottom of that iceberg are shootings like killings like Tom Jones and Claude Banks. And those are just, police misusing their power, doing what they think they need to do to enforce Jim Crow. And this Tom Jones case is a perfect case of enforcing Jim Crow. He didn't speak properly to that white man. And so the bus driver had to call the cops to get him in line. All right? So just reconsidering the role and the force of violence in that history, I think, is critically important. And then finally, history for its own sake. This collection of documents is just preserving and adding to our to what we have and how we understand our history. And journalists will be able to use the archive in local communities where they don't have access to these records, right? So I had to come down here and spend many, many, many months over there. When Jan was not available, I'd come down myself and spend months in the boxes over there at the Mississippi Archive building. And now we've digitized this material, and folks may not find what they want, but many of them likely will find what they want. Now, I have a few minutes left, so I do want to move to the book. So the book is based on the archive, which was built. The archive, basically, as I said, was built by our students. The book tells a related story. It tells the story of the way the Jim Crow rules and norms and practices distorted our understanding of law. So to put it in my publisher's words, he says these were my words, maybe I spoke them at one point, but he says, if the law can't protect you from a lynching, then isn't lynching the law? And what I try to describe here is the ways in which law is redefined. Obviously, Jim Crow sets, its own rules and regs, sit here, not there. But other parts of the law, which appear to be race neutral, are in fact redefined by race supremacy. And so there's a chapter in the book that talks about kidnapping and the ways in which African Americans were kidnapped without any recourse. And what I argue here is that the failure to prosecute these cases as kidnapping, it's not that these jurisdictions didn't prosecute kidnappings. They did. When whites were kidnapped, they were prosecuted, either by state or federal authorities. But when blacks were repeatedly taken from their homes and taken out to fields and bull-whipped and made to, crawl back home. And I focused on cases coming out of Southwest Mississippi in the early 1960s. And there are a bunch of them. And that was a common practice for Klansmen or would-be Klansmen. Grab you out of your home, discipline you, maybe let you keep your life, but leave you out there in the field, sometimes without your clothes on. And I trace a number of those cases coming out of Natchez, where folks who seem to want to affiliate with the NAACP or want to vote or anything like that, okay, this is the punishment. So let me just read a little bit of one of these kidnapping cases that I came to know about. Like the 6 million who fled the South in the decades before him, Burl Jones got off a train in Chicago in 1964, settled down, and lived a full life. Then, 4 decades later, as his senior years neared, Jones put his lifelong savings into a small but comfortable ranch house in Natchez, the nominal capital of Southwest Mississippi. In July 2004, about 6 months before Jones left Illinois, Natchez had sworn in its first black mayor since Reconstruction, and so Jones felt it was safe to go back home. Natchez lies 33 miles northwest of Meadville. This is for the non-Mississippi folks who might read the book. Jones knew little about the civil rights movement in Southwest Mississippi, not about the famous SNCC voting rights campaigns led by Robert Moses in the towns of Macomb and Liberty in 1961, not about the Freedom Summer that would, in the weeks following Jones's journey to Chicago, bring hundreds of students from across the country into the state. Southwest Mississippi was the headquarters of the recently revived and particularly virulent branch of the Ku Klux Klan, the White Knights, whose members, upon hearing the call Kiwi, would drop what they were doing and join in action, most often a criminal enterprise targeting blacks. Though it was the seat of Franklin County, Meadville, with a population of about 400 in 1964, it was really not much more than its main street and a few offshoots. Justice was dispensed from the county courthouse next door to the sheriff's office and jail. On a Friday evening in June, Jones, then 25 years old, was arrested in his Ford on Main Street by a local police officer who claimed to have received a complaint that Jones ran a red light. Locked up for the violation, Jones got in contact with his father, who came down and paid $10 to get him released. The sheriff refused to release the young man. When he finally was released, it was just after daybreak. He did not make it out of the jailhouse door. In the hallway, 2 men wearing white hoods grabbed him, pounded him with baseball bats, and blindfolded him and stuck him in the back of a car. The kidnappers covered Jones's eyes, but as he later pieced it together, it was the Homachita National Forest where his kidnappers took him. The Klan's whipping ground of choice, Homachita was where 1 month earlier, Klansmen had taken 2 other Meadsville young men. That was Hezekiah D. and Charles Moore. I go on, I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but I go on to describe how he was flogged in the forest, and then, although he was half dead, Jones's ordeal was not yet over. Get out of town, his kidnappers warned him, and so he did. A few days after his abduction, he boarded the Rock Island line and headed to Chicago. So that's not in the archive because he didn't live. He didn't die. He lived and was banished to Chicago. So the book, is tries to pick, specific incidents where I can frame these legal questions and talk about the ways in which the Jim Crow rules completely distorted and in some cases continues to distort our understanding of what should be colorblind law. So I am ready to hear what you have to say about these 2 projects. Thank you so much.
We have time for questions. If you'll raise your hand, we'll bring the microphone to you.
excellent effort. In addition to the state archives, where the source documents are kept, where are other documents kept that inform your digital archives?
As I mentioned, the federal archives, those are the very best. They're not easy to get to because you have to go through a federal bureaucracy called FOIA in order to obtain these documents. But once you do that, they're pretty revealing. And then also the NAACP records, all the branches at one point were required to send all their records to the Library of Congress. So the Mississippi records would be in Washington, right? So local records vary from state to state and from county to county. In many counties, there's no records available. One of the things that Jan has been able to do for us is not just obtain records from an archive here, but also she's helped us with our genealogy. So if we want to find family members, she's helped us do that. And families sometimes keep records, but their records are obviously incomplete. One thing that allowed us to do this project in 2007, which probably couldn't have been done in 1995, is all the newspapers, or many of the newspapers are now digitized. So our students don't have to go to the library and, to do this thing anymore. They can look at, stay in their bedrooms, and we have access through the university with the newspapers. All the major black press, as well as all the Jackson News, all the major press are now digitized. So that has really speeded the project along.
It's quite an honor to hear all the stuff you're doing. Thank you. I'm wondering about the whenever you have postings that have alleged perpetrators, kind of like the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. Do you have a function where they families of that side of the equation are able to respond or give information about that incident that maybe comes from the other side?
That's great. That's a great question. We have a comment section and a be in touch with us section where anyone can be in touch with us. We have focused here on the victims, not on the perpetrators. Where we have names of people, alleged perpetrators, where we have names of alleged perpetrators, they're in that people section. So you can put in a name, or Screws, for example, Sheriff Screws, and it'll pop up, right? But we have far more. We haven't collected information, nor have we really focused on the relationship of perpetrators, alleged perpetrators, and their family members to this material. There are other groups that are doing that. There's a group called Coming to the Table, which is very active in trying to give pathways for Americans of all races to come to grips with this material.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And I was in Franklin County, work-related, the day the case was settled, dealing with Moore and Dees, and not knowing that the case was settled until traveling back to Jackson. The atmosphere was so, you could cut it with a knife, and it was about that case. So
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah,
but also this project reminds me of a project, but this was one cold case file dealing with Lewis Allen in a mid-county where a former, I believe, FBI agent was encouraging the students from Southern University, Baton Rouge, to pursue that cold case. And just wondering, I know those many cases, do you know?
Thank you for
the outcome of
asking that. Yes, I have been in touch for many years with Lewis Allen's son, who now lives in Louisiana, and just deeply regret that case has never really been prosecuted. I know that the federal government has, examined the case, and I know there are a number of people who say they know who killed Lewis Allen. This guy, fellow by the name of Plater, who works at Tulane University, has done a lot of research on that case. However, nothing has ever come of it, and that would be for the federal government. It's not included in our archive because it's out of time for us.
Fantastic job.
Thank you.
And welcome, fellow Tuvaluan. Edgar Smith.
Oh, how are you?
All righty.
All
Look,
right.
it's been a while.
So nice to see you
It's
again.
good to see you, lady. Look here. I grew up in the Mississippi Delta in the 30s, and there were many cases in which people just disappeared. They didn't know what happened to them. Matter of fact, it happened to one member of my own family. And I wonder to what extent can your effort contribute to those kinds of situations?
Thank you for that. We get questions all the time from family members whose relatives have disappeared. And families have a little, piece of information here, a piece of evidence here, a rumor here, another rumor over there. But sometimes you can't string all that together and get an answer. We do the best we can. I tell the story in the book of this woman, Ollie Hunter, who passed away, who was killed in a little town called Donaldson, Georgia, in the 1940s. The only way we know who it was who was killed was because a man wrote a letter to the NAACP. He didn't know who Ollie, her name. He just wrote a letter to the NAACP saying this woman went into a store, touched a can, upset the store owner who came out after her and beat her to death with an axe. And that's how it went. But for that letter, if that man hadn't written that letter, her case would have completely disappeared. He wrote the letter. We were able to match up the letter with death certificates from that town and get her name. But you can't, there are going to be so many cases where we can't do that. Thank you for that question. And what I will say here is that I'm coming to this work. We're coming, those of us who've done this, produced this archive, way too late. This should have been done 50 years ago, if not 25 years ago. And now I'm talking personally to all the folks who are involved in these African American studies programs across the country. And, their interest is in cultural studies, and I'm fine with that. Study all the rap groups you want to. But this history should have been retrieved a long time ago.
I'd like to thank you for your presentation. My name is Johnny Gilmore, and I'm from Macomb, Southwest Mississippi. And I was 12 years old during Freedom Summer. And Arlene Quinn is from Macomb, and Harry Bowie. And in fact, Bob Moses came to Macomb in 1961. I was 9 years old when Hubert Lee was killed. So I appreciate the presentation. I made 70 years old this summer.
What a young, to be
So,
70 again.
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating story to be told. We lived that history during Freedom Summer. Like I said, I was 12 in Macomb, Mississippi, and we had almost 40 bombings in Macomb and outside area of Macomb. So I look forward to reading your book. I've read a lot of books. John Evans is over at Lemuria, and about 10 years ago, I read Ann Moody's book,
Yes.
Coming of Age in Mississippi. My wife got it for me, and I was acquainted with John Evans. I read all of the books of that era, and information is so important.
Yeah.
Knowing is so important, so I appreciate it, and I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you so much. And of course, the chapter that I described on kidnapping, I told you about the Burl Jones case, that's out of Natchez, but a lot of it is Southwest Mississippi. So Macomb, folks, really figures in the civil rights movement because a lot of folks from there worked on the railroad. And so they had a kind of independence. The local white man wasn't paying them. They were getting paid by the railroad. They were porters on the railroad, Pullman porters. And so when Bob and Harry and those guys went down there in 1961, there were a couple of folks there that could help them, that could make introductions to them to that community. And those folks did suffer. And I have some of those stories in the book of how they were taken out and whipped. One guy was taken out, whipped, and had to flee town. His story is in the book, out of Macomb. So Macomb was really an anchor in that early movement. And luckily, they lived to tell the story coming out of Macomb. Because it was a dangerous moment. I'm from Tougaloo, so I know that a bunch of Tougaloo students joined Hollis Watkins, MacArthur Cotton. They all joined with Bob and went down there to break Macomb. Southwest Mississippi was the worst part of a bad state.
Judge Burnham, I'm glad to see something that came of us hauling all those boxes for you over at the archives.
Oh, you remember that?
I do. My question is Thomas More still alive?
Excuse me?
Is Thomas More still alive?
He is.
Because
He
I
lives in
remember when he came to the archives and he first told me about his brothers, and I had never heard that story. I was dumbfounded to try to find, some information.
He's an amazing man. He's an Army guy. Thomas was in the service, Vietnam, when his brother was killed. Their mother had two children. She was a widow. Her husband died early. And Thomas was the older brother. And he was over in Vietnam when his brother was lynched. And he just, survivor's guilt. He just has really never really gotten over that moment. But he has devoted a good part of his life to this work. And let me say one other thing, too, here, which is that he came to this many years, after many years of dealing with his own grief. So it wasn't until the 1990s, his brother was killed in 1964, and he didn't do anything about it. I won't say he didn't do anything about it, but he didn't know, he didn't talk about it until a journalist came to him in the 1990s. And at that point, he said, it's time, his mother had passed, it's time to talk about this. We wouldn't have known about the D. Moore case. That case, by the way, I'm talking about buried cases, buried truths. That case was buried. We didn't know about that case until Thomas decided in the 1990s, let's just bring this one back up again. And let me talk about, as he said in his deposition, let me talk about how they let my brother lie bitten by turtles on the bottom of the Mississippi River. Finally started talking about it.
We have several questions from the live stream. Juana Harris asks, can a civil lawsuit be filed in the Emmett Till case or any other civil rights case that has been closed?
The answer to that is only if the statute of limitations doesn't apply. If I could say more, but then I'd be giving you a legal lesson. I don't think I'm being paid to give a legal lesson up here.
Therese Baker Passmore asks, what sites are there for articles in black newspapers? I find many are not on newspapers.com.
ProQuest, African American Press. ProQuest, African American Press. They've digitized, I don't know how accessible it is to non-subscribers, but they have digitized the Chicago Defender, Baltimore Afro-Am, the Pittsburgh Courier. Those are the three main national newspapers of the day.
And Anna Mae Mays asks, she says, thank you for your presentation. I've always heard of bodies found during the search for Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman. My question is, how many of these cases in your archive go back to the bodies found during the search for Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman?
The only two bodies that we know about are those of D and Moore, 1964, not found until July, I think it's July, August of 64. They were killed in May, maybe August 64, and the bodies were actually recovered. So those are the only two bodies. But she makes reference to, how shall I call it, a saying about in the African American community that, there are so many bodies in the water. You know, people say, we'll never know. And it's true, we will never know. But the point of this project is we need to start trying to figure out. It's not enough to say, oh, you know, there's so many, we'll just never know. So the point of this project is, well, these folks don't want it left that we'll never know. They want to be known. They want to be included in the book of history. And unless we do this work, it's not enough. It's just simply not enough to say, it was horrific. We'll never know. That does nobody any good.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burnham. I just wanted to mention that you can also access some African American papers on Chronicle in America. The Department of Archives and History participated in that with the Library of Congress, so you can access the Jackson Advocate and other Mississippi Black newspapers. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your work on the commission.
The commission, thank you for that. The commission is nationally sponsored. It is a federal commission convened pursuant to a federal law signed by President Trump, and it includes now 4 members. The law calls for 5 members, but we currently have 4. And our job is to smooth the road for the recovery, digitization, and release of records pertaining to civil rights cold cases. And there's no time limit. So yeah, there is a time limit. Excuse me, there is a time limit. But we're not talking just about cases affecting African Americans here. We're talking about cases of any racial group where civil rights were violated, and the cases have not been fully addressed. And so our job is, and we're only talking, the other qualifications, we're just talking about federal records here. So if records are being held in Mississippi, those don't come within our purview. We're only talking about records of the War Department, the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms Unit, the DOJ, FBI, any federal agency that now has records. Those records have to pass through NARA. We can then review them and create an archive to be made available to the public through NARA. So the comparator here is the John F. Kennedy Assassination Act, which created a commission similar to ours, and which pulled together all of the federal records that pertain to the assassination. And they're now compiled in one place. You can just go and take a look.
I think we've come to the top of another hour. Thank you all for being here today. Don't forget about the Archaeology Expo this weekend. Come back next week to see the documentary on Mound Bayou. We have copies of Professor Burnham's book, By Hands Now Known, for sale over here, and she'll be glad to talk to you about it or the website or anything that you may want to. Help me thank Margaret Burnham for this fantastic program.